at the National Archives in Fort Worth, Texas. The National Archives, our main building is in Washington, D.C., but we have buildings throughout the country, which is the reason why I'm coming to you today from Fort Worth. What I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about the National Archives, what we are and what we do, and then we're going to take a look at documents and how those documents illustrate certain powers of the president, and how those powers of the president that are spelled out specifically in our Constitution, the Article 2, Section 2 of our Constitution. So what I'm going to do is put up a PowerPoint really quickly. Hopefully you guys, there we go. You guys will be able to see this, and I'm going to be switching back and forth between my document camera and the PowerPoint today. So the National Archives, we are best known for preserving and exhibiting what we call the Charters of Freedom, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States, and the Bill of Rights, those first 10 amendments to our Constitution. We are best known for doing that. These three documents, the most important documents of our government, set up the structure of government and give us our rights as citizens. But we are so much more than just those three documents. It's our mission here at the National Archives to preserve and provide access to the permanent records of the United States government. So we have a variety of different types of things. So, for example, on your screen there, you can see in the upper left-hand corner a document which is the Declaration of Intention for Albert Einstein to become an American citizen. We also have when Washington took command, when we went to the moon, a map of the original 13 colonies. Which school went ahead and just connected for us? What? The school that just connected, can you please tell me what school you are?
School. Hang on, you guys.
I don't know. I'm assuming you said Noble? Yes? Okay, great. If you don't mind putting your microphone on mute for us, and then when we get to the portion where we are interacting with students, then I will call on you to answer some questions, okay? So again, we have at the National Archives our mission to preserve and provide access to the permanent records of the federal government. So on the bottom there, we have a photograph of a Japanese family before they went to an internment camp during World War II. We have the wonderful propaganda art that was created by our government during both world wars. We have a World War I draft card that was for the famous baseball player Ty Cobb. And then in the lower right-hand corner, a photograph of the Rosie the Riveter, an example of when women went to work during the wartime, during World War II, into the factories. So as you can tell, we have a very broad existence of what we have at the National Archives, starting from the beginning of the federal government all the way to probably about 2004, I would say. Maybe some even more recent than that, but from all different aspects of our government. And these particular documents come in all different types of forms, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. They come in written form, which can be letters and notes, memos, and reports. We also have photographs, maps, and drawings, and even sound recordings, video recordings, and electronic records. So all of these different types of documents or records that are created by our federal government, the National Archives has those. And the National Archives, we are just a place where you can go and get information about the United States government and important events in American history. So we keep all of these documents in special boxes that protect them from dirt and dust and light, which allows them to be preserved for future generations. So hopefully your children, your grandchildren, even your great-grandchildren can come to the National Archives one day and learn about our government and different events in American history. So now we're going to talk a little bit about those presidential powers. And, President Obama, in his 2009 inaugural address, made a comment in that address where he said, "At these moments, America has carried on not simply because of the skill or vision of those in high office, but because we, the people, have remained faithful to the ideals of our forebears and true to our founding fathers." Our founding documents, which our founding fathers obviously put together. And of course, one of those founding documents being the United States Constitution. The United States Constitution obviously sets up the framework for our government, and it is here in Article 2, Section 2, that it spells out the powers of our president. So what I would like to do is ask a couple of the sites if they can tell me any of the powers of the president that they know. So let me ask the students at Kenmore Middle if you can tell me one of the powers of the president.
Go.
One of the powers of the president is his authority in the way that he speaks and the way that he commands, but one of them is also the State of the Union when he addresses the U.S. with his problems, and also he's a part of the judicial branches of the U.S. as he is one figurehead Congresses and also the delegates. He may also inflict pardons and commutes for people involved, as did Grover Cleveland when he pardoned someone from a death sentence to a life sentence, and also John Adams with his recommendation for Secretary of State.
Okay, so you're looking at some of the documents and bringing up some of the documents that we're going to have a chance to look at. Very good. Yes, you brought up several different powers of the president that are laid out for us in our Constitution. One of them being the fact that a president can pardon individuals for crimes against or offenses against the United States. You also pointed out the fact that the president can, pardon sentences or commute, meaning to shorten sentences of the shorten sentences for those people who have been convicted of a crime against the U.S. Exactly. There are a couple others I'm thinking about. So does anybody at Birchwood Intermediate want to chime in and tell me what they believe another power of the president that maybe they did not mention?
The president is allowed to veto or pass laws that the Congress has sent to them.
Okay, so a president can veto laws, right, or sign into law those laws that have been passed by the legislative branch. Exactly. And you guys are bringing up some things that are important. Our founding fathers, they wanted to make sure that not one of the branches of government was too powerful, right? So they wrote into our Constitution the ability for there to be what was known as checks and balances. And this way, each one of the branches could check each other so that not one of them would become too powerful. And that point right there about the president being able to sign things into law, that is one example of how the executive branch is able to check the legislative branch. Exactly. So those are some of the things that the president is obviously the powers that are spelled out in Article 2, Section 2. We're going to take a closer look at 4 specific powers also that the president has by looking at some documents and how those documents illustrate these different powers. We're going to take a look specifically at the language that's written in our Constitution. So I'm going to bring that up. It's here. Article 2, Section 2 states that our president shall be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of of the United States and of the militia of several states when called into the actual service of the United States. So obviously our president is responsible for our military, right? And is responsible for sending those troops into harm's way. So I'm going to just put up on the document camera. This here is a photograph. I'm having a hard time seeing how large this is, so I'm not exactly sure for you here. But this is a photograph of President William Jefferson Clinton, or Bill Clinton, and he is giving a speech at a podium on behind him is the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, and you can see many sailors or Navy men that are aboard this ship. And President Clinton, this particular photograph definitely illustrates the power of the president to be commander-in-chief. Here he is actually giving a speech at a memorial, a private memorial, for those sailors that were lost and injured aboard the USS Cole. This was an event when the USS Cole was actually at the port of Yemen, and a terrorist group attacked that particular ship. And so here he is carrying out the duties of commander-in-chief here at this particular memorial, and talking about how taking on his role as commander-in-chief. So that's just one example of a power of the president that's illustrated and how it's illustrated in documents from the National Archives. We're going to take a look at another responsibility or power of the president, and this was, as you guys mentioned before, that he shall have the power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States. And so an example of that is this particular document here that I want to show you. And this particular document is written by Abraham Lincoln. It talks about a man named Charles Boland who was found guilty of selling what was known as fraudulent bounty land claims. In the early part of our country's history, we were very cash poor. We didn't have a lot of money. And so in order to reward or pay people for being in our military, they sometimes gave out land for individuals instead of money, because we were very rich in land but very poor in cash. So they would do that. So one of the things that came up about this was people started selling these fraudulent land claims. And so this particular document is where Charles Boland, he had been found guilty of this and convicted and supposed to serve 10 years of a sentence. Well, he served 9 years of that sentence, and this happened to be in the state of Louisiana, and several leading men of the community came together and wrote the president and asked for a pardon for Charles Boland. And so here, President Lincoln actually pardons Charles Boland of this crime. And so when you have a pardon, the president actually wipes your record clean. It's as if it never even happened. And the student at Kenmore, I believe it was, did mention that the president can also commute a sentence, which means shortening a sentence. So say he was convicted of 10 years. If he had wanted to, he could change his sentence to serve 5 years instead of 10. So here you have President Lincoln actually pardoning Charles Boland, and it says, "Now, therefore, be it known that I, Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States of America, in consideration of the premises, divers other good and sufficient reasons thereunto have granted, and do hereby grant unto him, the said Charles Boland, a full and unconditional pardon." And you can see here, I'll zoom in just a little bit so you guys can see, you have Abraham Lincoln's signature. And then what's also really interesting about these presidential documents is that you generally have a presidential seal. And here you can see this particular presidential seal. And it's really a lot of fun to compare some of these seals over time to see how they've changed a little bit. So that's always an enjoyable thing as well. So that's another example, or this document illustrates the president actually having that power to grant reprieves and pardons. So the next power of the president is, let me switch over here to the, to the PowerPoint and show you that the next power of the president is that he shall have the power by and with the advice and the consent of the Senate to make treaties. So keep in mind that this is where our president has the ability to negotiate with other countries on behalf of the United States. And again, that checks and balances thing, in order for a treaty to become official, the Senate has to approve it. And so you can actually see that work of checks and balances in this part right here, this clause of our Constitution in Article 2, Section 2. So I'm going to put up a document here, which is a treaty. It is the Treaty of Ghent. Does anybody know what the Treaty of Ghent is? Does anybody at Birchwood Charter know what the Treaty of Ghent did? And if you don't, that's okay. Any ideas?
No.
No? The Treaty of Ghent actually was a treaty that ended the war between the United States and Great Britain, which was known as the War of 1812. And so in 1814, President Madison sent several people over to negotiate peace terms with the people of Great Britain. So you can see here in this particular treaty, it's kind of cool because you can see all of the wax seals, and there are some people's names listed here that you may be familiar with. We have a John Quincy Adams, who later becomes President of the United States. But at this time, this was prior to his presidency, and he was acting as a diplomat, negotiating these terms for the president. They actually met in Belgium in order to put this treaty through. So this treaty was signed on Christmas Eve, actually, and they were able to come to some agreements of peace. And also one of the things that they did with the Treaty of Ghent was they promised to work to try to end the slave trade for both countries, both the United States and Britain. We know that it took quite a bit longer for the United States to do that. But here you have the second part of that document, and it is written out, and you actually have James Madison's signature here where he has approved this treaty, and again, the presidential seal, which you can see. So negotiating treaties obviously is a very important part of our president's powers, because it relates to our standing in the world. So Another one of the powers of the presidency that is lined out in our Constitution is here. It's listed that he shall nominate, and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, there we go again, right, shall appoint ambassadors, other public ministers and councils, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States whose appointments are not otherwise provided for. Okay, so that's one of those responsibilities. And here we have an example of that particular power. We have this document here that says the White House, August 19th of 1981, and it says, to the Senate of the United States, I nominate Sandra Day O'Connor of Arizona to be an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, Vice Potter Stewart, retired. Ronald Reagan. So Ronald Reagan, when he ran for president, one of the things that he promised was that he would appoint a female to the Supreme Court. And this document, because Potter Stewart, one of the Supreme Court justices, retired, there was a vacancy on the Supreme Court, and President Reagan appointed Sandra Day O'Connor, the first female, to the Supreme Court. So this is just a document that illustrates that power. So what I'd like to do now is to look at some of the documents that I shared with the teachers. Hopefully everybody had an opportunity to take a look at some of these documents. And I'm going to put one up, and I will ask the students at Birchwood Charter, if they can tell me, did you guys have an opportunity to take a look at the documents at Birchwood Charter?
Yeah.
You did. Okay. So I have this one here. It says, by the President of the United States of America, a proclamation. And it says here, this particular document, can anybody tell me a little bit about this document? What is it about? Birchwood Charter? Can you tell me who this document is written by? Okay, I'm not hearing anything from you guys. So,
Okay. So we don't know.
Gerald Ford.
Gerald Ford.
Gerald Ford.
okay, yes, this document is written by Gerald Ford, President Gerald Ford. I'll ask the students then at Birchwood Intermediate if they can tell me, do you know who this document is written about? We know that President Gerald Ford wrote it.
It was being about Richard Nixon almost being impeached because he spied on he was accused of spying on the Democratic Party.
Okay, so it is a document that Gerald Ford wrote, and it was relating to, like you said, former President Richard Nixon. He had, there was an issue, it's now known as the Watergate scandal, right? And Watergate having been the complex where this particular event happened, but supposedly there was a break-in at the Democratic National Party, and there were people that broke in, and it was found later that those people were part of or related to part of Richard Nixon's administration, and they were actually found guilty of that. And because of some of the cover-up and everything like that, Richard Nixon was possibly going to be impeached, right? The House of Representatives and the Senate were drawing up articles of impeachment on him. I think it had passed the House, but not yet the Senate. And so because of that, President Nixon actually resigned the presidency. And in this document, Gerald Ford is doing what? Birchwood Intermediate. What was he doing for Richard Nixon? You told me what happened, but okay, let me say this. What power of the presidency does this particular document illustrate?
Tell your name, first name only. Go ahead.
My name is Joseph Paul Santoprano, and I think it is
Presidential power is used.
pardon or commuting or something.
Pardoning.
Yeah, pardon.
You said it.
Pardon.
Exactly. He's pardoning former President Nixon, right?
I think
And he says that. You think what?
And Gerald Ford was Richard Nixon's vice president, I think.
Well, originally he wasn't. He was Speaker of the House, and because the Vice President had, there were issues with the Vice President also, then he becomes then Gerald Ford became Vice President, and then eventually he becomes President, right? He wasn't really expecting to be President, but he became the President. And, you know, did you want to add something?
And Gerald Ford didn't even have to go through an election, I believe.
You're right. Because the succession of what the Constitution says is that we have the President, the Vice President, and then the Speaker of the House will then take over, right, for any reason. So, but you're right, exactly. He didn't go through an election. But the one thing he does here he actually spells out, he points to the Constitution. He says, "Now, therefore, I, Gerald R. Ford, President of the United States, pursuant to the pardon power conferred upon me by Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, have granted and by these presents do grant a full, free, and absolute pardon unto Richard Nixon for all offenses against the United States which he, Richard Nixon, has committed or may have committed or taken part in during the period from January 20th, 1969, when Nixon took the presidency, through August 9th, 1974, when he resigned the presidency." And this was something that was very controversial, that President Ford had pardoned Richard Nixon, but he did so because he really felt like in order for the country to move on, that this needed to be behind the country. So he went ahead and he, granted President Nixon this pardon. So this is a great document to see that actually that power in illustrated in a document, and it even points out, the reason why I'm doing this is because I have the power to do so. It's listed in the Constitution, right? So I'm going to ask the students then at Noble, who I believe have joined us. I'm going to put up a photograph, and this is another power of the presidency that we pointed out earlier. Can you tell me what power of the presidency does this photograph illustrate?
Keaton.
You know what it is? Okay, so go to
Nice and loud.
tell them your name and then
Hi, my name is Keaton, and I think it's the Navy and the military.
Okay, so you see part of the military here, right? And then here is President George W. Bush. Wait, don't leave yet. I was going to ask you, so what power then is this showing us? What power is this illustrating if the president is with the military? Do you know?
Saluting them to go off to war.
Well, do you remember what in the Constitution, what it says one of those powers are of the president? What is he for the military?
The commander.
Do you know that term?
Chief?
Exactly. He's the commander-in-chief. You're right. So this document, which is a photograph of George W. Bush, our 43rd president, it is a photograph of him with some Marines at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and it just simply illustrates the fact that our president, as you pointed out, sending them off to war. This is one of the major responsibilities of the president, having to be responsible for all of our troops and sending them off to war and putting them and their lives in danger, right, and in harm's way. So this is one of those really important roles of our president, is being commander-in-chief. You're exactly right. Thank you. So we'll take a look then at another document, and let's see what school we can talk to. Let's talk to Kenmore Middle. I'm going to put up another document here for Kenmore Middle. And this particular document at the top here, or I guess mid-page, it says John F. Kennedy. Have you guys had an opportunity to take a look at that document?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Jared, and we did get a chance to look at that document.
Okay, so great. Can you tell me a little bit about this document? Do you remember what it, first of all, what power does it illustrate?
It illustrates a treaty.
Exactly. You're right. And do you remember what treaty that it is spelling out, or at least what it talks about that the treaty is about?
The treaty was, I guess, not allowing nuclear, I guess, testings underwater and in outer space.
Exactly. This treaty was basically banning, nuclear weapons testing in the atmosphere and outer space and underwater. Do you remember which countries were involved in this particular treaty?
Russia?
Mm-hmm.
Russia and the United States.
Exactly. And one other.
Great Britain.
Exactly. Yes. So we have, this particular document who John F. Kennedy, President Kennedy signs, and this is shortly after what we know as the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was an event that essentially we almost went to war with Russia. But this is so that we can make sure that these, different nuclear weapons aren't being tested in, underwater, in the atmosphere, or outer space. And so not only does the United States and Russia and Great Britain come together and sign this, they sign this in Moscow. President Kennedy signs the copy in Moscow. And then after that, these three countries allow this treaty to be opened up to be used or signed by other countries too, who realize the importance of outlawing this in our world, right? To make sure that these nuclear weapons are not tested. And again, not only do you have Kennedy having signed, but you have another one of the presidential seals there. So it definitely illustrates, as you pointed out, our or the president's role and responsibility and power to negotiate treaties with other countries. So that's exactly right. Thank you. So we're going to look at one more other document, and let's see here. Did they have an opportunity to join us? I saw another class join us.
Arlo Wusk at Sterling, I believe, did. Yeah, Sterling did.
They did?
Yeah,
okay. Fantastic. Would you guys like to take a look at this document here? Did you have an opportunity?
Okay. Yes, we did.
Okay. So since you guys had an opportunity to look at it, and I'm hearing feedback, so that's why I'm pausing a little bit. What is the power of the president that's illustrated in this particular document? Judicial. What power of the president? What is the president doing? Well, first of all, which president is signing this document? John Adams. Exactly. And what is John Adams doing in this document?
Nominating somebody?
He is nominating. Who is he nominating?
Marshall?
John Marshall, exactly. And what was John Marshall's current position when he was nominated to this position?
Secretary of State?
Right. So John Marshall was Secretary of State representing the United States throughout the world for the president. But why does Adams need to appoint him to the Supreme Court? What does it say? It's in place of John Jay, who has what?
Declined his appointment.
Exactly. So we know there's a vacancy because John Jay declined his appointment to the Supreme Court. Right? So Adams now has to appoint somebody else. John Marshall, just to point out, and if you guys don't mind muting your microphone for me, thank you, just so we don't have that feedback. Exactly. Thank you for that. John Marshall was appointed by Adams to the Supreme Court, and Marshall served as a Supreme Court justice and later the Chief Justice, and he served for over 3 decades, and he really set the Supreme Court up and the judicial branch as a branch that was equal in power to both the executive branch and the judicial and the legislative branch. And he set a lot of precedents in the Supreme Court. So this particular document, although it's very short, it had a very large impact on the nation's history. So you can look at these different documents as ways to not only show you how they actually illustrate those powers of our president, but also the fact that you can learn about different events in American history related to these documents.